On today's show, Spencer German stops by. We're going to talk about Kenny Atkinson, what he did in year one, and what he can do better in year two to make this team better when the postseason arrives. That's all straight ahead and so much more on today's edition of Locked on Cavs.
You are Locked on Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Up, everybody. My name is Danny Cunningham, and you might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. And I'm joined today by Spencer German, a good friend of mine from 92.3 The Fan, just like I am, as well as his podcast, Courtside with the Cavs, which you can get on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and the new Cavs Roundtable site. And you can find this podcast anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and make sure you are subscribed as we get started here. And Spencer, I want to talk today about Kenny Atkinson, because Kenny had a great first season in Cleveland. I think that anybody with any other opinion would be pretty far off there. He won Coach of the Year, won 64 games, and then the postseason didn't go the way that he or anybody else envisioned it to go. But I do think that there are some things that he can do differently in year number two. And I think one of the most interesting things to look at this year is what is different about the Cavs during the regular season on the lead up to the postseason than it was last year, where they just seemingly won every night.
Yeah, listen, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I keep kind of going back to at the end of at Kobe Altman's end of season press conference, where he talked about how he sort of joked that Kenny hadn't even unpacked all his boxes yet from moving to Cleveland, because we know last summer he was coaching the French team and was doing all that. And so it was kind of like a whirlwind of getting hired, going over to France for the Olympics, and then coming right back in and starting training camp with the Cavs, and how he already had ideas drawn out of things he can do differently this year and all that. And so he's had an entire offseason to game plan. And I am fascinated to see what some of his new, what his new approach might be to lineups and different players that he has. Some new players like Lonzo Ball and Larry Nance Jr., but also somebody like DeAndre Hunter, whose role is certainly going to change going into year two on this team and with Kenny Atkinson. And also with guys injured to start the year, Darius Garland, Max Strus, what is that all going to look like? How do guys kind of build chemistry in the meantime until they get to that point in the season when they're sort of, pushing for the playoffs and trying to make a run? But the biggest thing too, as I look back on year one, that stands out to me is just, I keep going back to that Pacers series. And I know the Pacers are going to be a lot different this year without Tyrese Halliburton and obviously Turner as well. But I still remain blown away and shocked by, and I think you felt this way too, Danny, how overmatched they looked in that series because of the style of play that the Pacers played. Just that up-tempo, relentless, full-court pressure at times, and the Cavs didn't seem ready for it. And so the biggest question I probably have going into year two of Kenny Atkinson is, how will he get this team equipped to play different styles, especially in the playoffs when everything gets kind of tightened up and everything gets ratcheted up? How will he prepare them to do that? Is it just simply more conditioning? What's it all going to kind of look like? But I think that was the biggest thing that stood out was, his plans, everything he had sort of set up for this team worked brilliantly up until that point. And now it's about figuring out how you can have the best team that time of year to play different styles, different paces, all of that.
So there were some things last year that Kenny, I don't want to necessarily say frequently did, although I do think it was done the majority of the time. There were some lineups that I just don't know were necessarily optimized. And it's hard for me to be super critical here, considering that they won 64 games in the regular season. They had arguably the best first round series in NBA history because they beat the Miami Heat by so many points in that 4-game sweep. And then, as you just got done talking about that series against the Pacers, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And I don't know how much of that is on Kenny Atkinson. I think some of it is, but I think largely the Cavs were not healthy and the Cavs did not play all that well. And I'm not sure that there's a coach out there that could have changed those two things. But I do think that some of the personnel changes, and you brought up Lonzo Ball, and I think he is the guy that we are going to just hear Kenny Atkinson gush about when media day gets here in a couple of weeks, after training camp practices during the season. I just think he's going to have a lot of positive things to say about Lonzo Ball. And a big reason why I think he's going to feel that way about Lonzo is I really believe, Spencer, that Lonzo Ball is going to change the way that the Cavs can be constructed at times. Like there were certain lineups last year that Kenny Atkinson put out where guys were out of position. And I personally would ask about this stuff. Like I remember asking a question, I believe it was in March or early April last year, about DeAndre Hunter playing more power forward than small forward, just kind of like where the comfort level is. And he brought up it being like a positionless type of thing. Like he doesn't view it that way, which is fine. But I think the pieces around him do matter. And like, for instance, with that, when DeAndre Hunter played power forward for the Cavs last year, according to Cleaning the Glass, the Cavs had a +9 net rating, which is really, really good. But when he played small forward, the Cavs were +12.5. So like, how can you get him into more of those situations? Sam Merrill is another one. He played a lot of small forward last year, and he's not necessarily a small forward. Their net rating was good when Sam played small forward, but it was great when he played shooting guard. So I look at these things and say, can he make the adjustments in those areas? And I think Lonzo Ball might be the guy that pushes him to be able to do that.
Yeah, I like where your head's at with that for sure. And we know Lonzo sort of becomes the replacement for Ty Jerome, that backup point guard role, who's supposed to sort of be able to give you some offensive help, but also facilitate maybe even a little bit more than Ty Jerome did. And that's all dependent on him being healthy. But I certainly am looking forward to seeing how he gets creative with somebody like Lonzo. I also think, to your point on how they use DeAndre Hunter, I think is automatically injected into the starting lineup by default now because of the Max Strus situation and in the injury that he's dealing with. But I was kind of curious before we even got news of that, if Kenny Atkinson would use DeAndre Hunter in that starting role more, just because I think when you got to the playoffs last year, he didn't want to mess with a good thing, right? Like you brought it up. They win 64 games. They were on such a roll throughout most of the season. Like why mess with it? Like why try to tinker when you know it was working? And I understand where his head was at with that. Max also did play for the most of that playoffs really, really well, and was kind of like that fiery spark that they needed, the emotional spark that they needed. But I do think like inserting DeAndre Hunter into the starting lineup also gives you a different look and gives you a sort of a different feel of things. And I agree with you, like how he uses him, if he decides to put him more in that small forward role versus the power forward role, how all those things kind of come together will be, I think, the things that fans should be paying attention to. Because I get it. I know, like Donovan Mitchell alluded to it after the season ended last year. Like they could go 82-0 next year, nobody's going to care. But the thing that I think but the thing that
pretty cool to cover.
It would, yeah, you're right. That would be a pretty historic thing. But I think like if you're a fan who's going into the season and you're like, well, nothing matters till the playoffs, I think those are the things that do matter. Right? Seeing how Kenny does different things with his lineups, how he's utilizing certain guys, how certain guys fit together, the chemistry that gets built throughout the early months of the season and then into the spring. Those are the things I think to keep an eye on that will matter come April, May, and obviously June if they get that far.
So you brought up having Hunter in the starting lineup, and I don't know for sure if that was going to be a thing that happened if not for the Max Strus injury. I do think now at this point that is maybe not an absolute lock to happen, but I'd be very surprised if DeAndre Hunter is not the starting small forward on opening night against the New York Knicks next month. And I don't think that that's going to be a role in which he ever relinquishes. I would imagine that's where he's going to be for the entirety of the season if everyone is healthy. And that group of five, and we don't know about Darius Garland's availability for opening night. Spencer, have been operating under the thought that he's not going to be available early in the season, that he might miss some time, and that's not a big deal. He needs to be playing his best basketball at the end of the season. He doesn't need to be available in October. Agreed. That's fine. But that starting five, so Garland, Mitchell, Hunter, Mobley, and Allen, played 73 possessions last year, according to Cleaning the Glass. In those 73 possessions, they had a net rating of plus 28.8, which is incredibly good. Like that would be the best starting lineup in all of basketball if that becomes the Cavs' full-time starting five. And I do think that is an adjustment Kenny can make. That said, he is somebody who has spoken very highly about Max Strus in the past. He's called him, I'm sure you know the word I'm going to say next, a connector, many, many times throughout his first season in Cleveland. And I think that's going to be a hard thing for him to do. But I do think that having Hunter in the starting five at the beginning of the season is going to be a thing that sets up the Cavs better for the deeper they go, because I do think that's the way to get the five best players on the floor. And I think the biggest gripe you can have with Kenny is that they just did not have the five best players on the floor frequently enough last season. And that's part of the reason why they came up short.
I think that's a really good point. And in that playoff series, I think you could argue that they didn't have the five best guys on the floor at certain points in that series against the Pacers. And that, I think, bared itself out when it was all said and done. But yeah, listen, like, they made that trade at the deadline last year, and Kobe talked so much about how this felt like a move to kind of get them over the top. We've been talking for several years about the Cavs trying to add a wing that can play both ends of the floor and contribute to you offensively and be a shooter and create his own shot. And that's what DeAndre Hunter brings to the table. So to me, it is, I don't want to say like a waste, but to not maximize his minutes, to not get him out there as much as possible and have him with that starting group, I think is a missed opportunity to a degree. So, and again, I get why he did it the way he did it last year. When you win 64 games, you have a very long leash that you can say, hey, this worked, so I'm going to stick with what got me here. I get that. But I think this year, taking a different approach to Hunter and how he fits with this group, and I think you're right, like, assuming he gets a lot more minutes early on in the season to sort of build that chemistry and all that, I think that will matter massively as the season progresses and as you get closer to the playoffs and in the playoffs next year.
All right, well, I have a take that I stumbled upon during the first segment that I hadn't made the connection quite yet. I'm going to unleash that on Spencer next, right here on Locked on Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by Monarch Money. Did you know most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth? Imagine that. You don't know how much money you're actually worth. You need to know that. That is vital information. Well, Monarch Money can help you with that, because whether it's 401ks, properties, investments, you might not have the full picture. And if you don't have the full picture, there's a pretty good chance that you're leaving some money on the table. That's why Monarch Money exists. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch, built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you, where you can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel like you are in control of your money. It's your money after all, right? You want to be in control, and you don't even have to touch a spreadsheet the entire time to make it happen. So if that sounds like something you need, and chances are it probably does, don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. Again, that's half off your first year, 50% off your first year. Go to monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA. Again, monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get 50% off your first year. Thanks again for making Locked on Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating and leave us a nice review. And Spencer, you said in the first segment that Lonzo Ball is the replacement for Ty Jerome. And while that's not the guy that was traded for him, because they traded Isaac Okoro for him, I think that's a pretty common opinion. And I don't necessarily think that that is incorrect. But the more and more I think about this, I think Lonzo Ball is actually a replacement for somebody else. And I did a bit of a deep dive into this on my Substack that I published yesterday on Wednesday. I think that Lonzo Ball is actually a replacement for Caris LeVert. I think that is the guy that he's replacing. Now, you might say, well, Caris LeVert was not on the Cavs at the end of this past year. He was traded to Atlanta for DeAndre Hunter in February. Yes, that's 100% true. But the more and more I think about this, I think that if you dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that Caris LeVert provided for the Cavs, maybe it's not the pressure that he was able to put on the rim, because I think that's the one area where maybe this comparison falls apart a little bit. But everything else, I think, you know what, Lonzo Ball doesn't necessarily do the stuff Ty Jerome did, but he does a lot of the stuff that Caris LeVert did.
I can see where you're going with that. And I do think Caris became, especially as time went on here in Cleveland, like a really good just playmaker in general. Like, he could create for himself. And there was nights where he was brilliant, right? Like, he'd go off for like 30 points and you'd see the Caris LeVert that when they traded for him, it was like, oh, like this is the guy they wanted to sort of emerge and be more consistent. But he's always just been a streaky shooter that way. But even on the nights where he wasn't knocking down shots, he would help other people create shots. He could pass. He would, he would make plays on the defensive end that would then spark other guys getting a bucket at the other end. So, yeah, I can see where you're going with that. And that did kind of feel like, to a degree, something that was missing a little bit from this team in the postseason was that guy that could kind of do a little bit of everything, but maybe more consistently. And, I think, to your point, like, Ty was such a prolific scorer, but I don't know that, like, he's not the same playmaker that I think Lonzo is when he's healthy. And yeah, I like that comparison. It's going to be easy for people to sit there and say he's the replacement to Ty Jerome, like I said, because he's the backup point guard, right? Like, he's the guy who is filling that role that's now gone or vacated by Ty Jerome. But yeah, to expect that he's going to do the exact same things that Ty Jerome did and think that he's going to score the same way Ty Jerome did, I think would be ill-advised for people going into the season, without question.
So, and the thing that led me to this was actually Sam Merrill. Sam Merrill is the connector from Lonzo is not replacing Ty Jerome to Lonzo is actually replacing Caris LeVert. This is what got me there. So last year, according to Cleaning the Glass, Sam Merrill played roughly 2,000 possessions at small forward, which I think is out of place for Sam. Like, I think he's a shooting guard. I thought Kenny played him too frequently at small forward. Now, of those just under 2,000 possessions he played at small forward, well, actually, let me give you this first. So in those 2,000 possessions, the Cavs outscored their opponents by 12.1 points per 100 possessions. Very, very good. Like, that is elite level stuff.
Right.
Now, when Sam played shooting guard, the Cavs outscored their opponents by 16.3 points per 100 possessions. So they were even more elite, right? But there were, of the 2,000 possessions that Sam played at small forward, Caris LeVert was listed as a shooting guard for just over 500 of those possessions. So that to me says, okay, well, is Sam actually playing small forward in that lineup, or is he just kind of there in name only and Caris LeVert's the actual small forward, considering Caris LeVert is a bigger guy than him and a better defender than Sam Merrill? In those 520 possessions, Cavs net rating was plus 26.4. So the 500 plus possessions that Caris LeVert played alongside Sam Merrill last year, the Cavs were unbelievable. And then in the 1,500 possessions, Sam Merrill played small forward without Caris LeVert on the floor, Cavs were just plus 7.1, which is good, but like, that's not worth maybe having somebody play out of position. So for me, that is basically saying, well, Sam Merrill, because of Lonzo Ball being that Caris LeVert replacement, if you will, is going to be somebody that plays in position so much more, and the data backs that up being so much better. Like, would I anticipate that lineup's going to be a plus 20 per 100 possessions? I don't know. Like, that's a little extreme, but that's kind of what it was with Caris LeVert.
Well, and this is where, like, Kenny's mixing and matching of lineups is going to get interesting because, when Darius is back, we know how he likes to space these guys out, right? Like, the starting lineup kind of comes out together, but then he tended to go, all right, we're going to keep Donovan and Evan out there, and then we're going to switch it and bring Darius and Jarrett back in. And maybe in those situations, it's where you get Darius running the point, and then Lonzo playing that small forward role, and then Sam being able to sort of play that shooting guard role. And the fact that they chose to that we kind of went into the offseason assuming that they were only going to be able to pay one or the other. And I think most people, and maybe you didn't feel this way, Danny, but I think most people sort of felt, oh, of the two, Sam Merrill and Ty Jerome, they're going to bring back Ty Jerome because he was just so valuable last year. And they opted to bring back Sam Merrill instead. And I think a lot of that has to do with the shooting prowess there. You can never have too many shooters on an NBA team. We know how important that is. And if they're doing that, though, like they're leaning into him, to your point, I think playing more of the role that he's comfortable in that shooting guard spot where he can just kind of post up. Small forwards always, I feel like, got to create more of their own shots at times, like off dribble. And I just don't think that's Sam's game. You want to get him in a spot where he can just kind of catch and shoot. And I think that's kind of what that's setting up to be. So I really, really do like where your head's at with this. And I think this opens up bigger conversations too, as to like what that second lineup kind of looks like and how different guys kind of contribute on it. Like, I'm kind of curious what Dean Wade's role is right now on this team. And I know there's been some trade buzz with him too, but where does he sort of fit into the equation? I know he's played a big role at times. He's played power forward. He's played center. He's played small forward. They've moved him around a ton too. But if he is on this team when the season starts, I'm curious to see what his role sort of looks like for that second unit on this team.
I would expect him to be on the team when the season does begin. But man, I look at this and say, I just really think that he needs to shoot the basketball more, because that ultimately is the hang up with Dean Wade. He is somebody, and I kind of want to dive into the lineups a little bit coming up in a second, but he's somebody that I look at and say, yeah, he does a lot of really good things defensively. He's a good shooter, but and teams don't treat him the same way they treated Isaac Okoro defensively. Like they were not going to just ignore Dean Wade. But I do think the Cavs were a little too easy to guard at times last year, because from watching, it felt like Dean Wade always wanted to make the right play. He always wanted to be the guy that was making the correct play. He didn't want to be selfish, but sometimes wanting to make the right play so badly meant that he was a little hesitant. And I think that hesitancy maybe cost the Cavs a little bit in some of the lineups that they were in.
Well, I think what's interesting with Dean too is before they traded for DeAndre Hunter, I felt like there was too much at times on his shoulders as like the 9th or 10th best player on the team, because they didn't have that wing player, right? Like he was kind of seen as the wing player that could bring it all together and be the missing piece. And that was just a lot for a guy who, like I said, was like your 9th or 10th best player on the team. Once DeAndre Hunter got over here, I actually thought that would make it easier for Dean to just kind of play loose and shoot more, because he understood like it wasn't on him to be that missing piece, like in the starting lineup at times. He would have a more defined role as like, hey, you're coming off the bench for us. You're going to be important on the second unit, and we just want you to shoot the ball. And for whatever reason, that hesitancy sort of still remained. I hope that another offseason, again, to your point of him potentially still being here or likely still being here, I hope another offseason as he thinks through it and gets ready and gets built up for the season, he's able to just kind of play with a little more confidence. Because I agree with you. There are times where he's brilliant. I mean, I think back to that Celtics game 2 years ago where he was lights out and he pulls off this great comeback to beat the Celtics. And I'm like, if you can get that Dean Wade more consistently, like, of course, he's going to be a very important piece of this team. But there's too many times, too, where he gets the ball with space to shoot, and you can tell he's like thinking through it. The wheels are turning too much, and he's like, do I pass? Is there somebody open somewhere else that I need to get the ball to? And I think they just want him, like you said, to just shoot the ball sometimes. And if he does that, I think he can absolutely have an important role on this team.
Yeah, I think that he will be needed, but I also think the Cavs need him to be more aggressive, and that I think would be the number one gripe with Dean. Now, the Cavs do have starting lineup questions. They also have bench lineup questions. I want to dive into what we think should be Kenny Atkinson's blueprint for some of those things straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time that you had an urgent need, maybe a plumber, maybe your air conditioning went, right? You called around, you needed to get in touch with the service provider to help fix your problem. If you called and the first person you called didn't answer, maybe you left them a message, you might have, but then you probably moved on because you needed the problem fixed and you needed it fixed. Now, that's exactly why you need Open Phone, because Open Phone is the number one business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. Open Phone will let you manage business calls and texts from a single app, and the shared inbox feature is a total game changer because your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. Plus, their AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so that you never miss a customer. And right now, Open Phone offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that is openphone.com/LockedOnNBA, LOCKEDONNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first watch or listen today and every day. If you're watching the show on YouTube, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button for us and click subscribe. It is the very best way to help grow the channel. Spencer, we don't know what the starting five is going to be opening night. We don't know whether or not Darius Garland will be available, will not be available. We know Max Strus will not be available. I think we're both kind of penciling in DeAndre Hunter into that slot. But where would you go right now? Let's say Darius can't play opening night. Let's say he misses the first 2 weeks of the season, which I don't think is some crazy thought. who would you have starting alongside Donovan Mitchell in the backcourt?
I think I probably would start Lonzo. I feel like later on in the season, he might end up he's probably more so like your six man up, like off the bench, like leading that second unit. But just what he brings to the table, the fact that he can facilitate a little bit more, and I think that also creates other opportunities for Donovan Mitchell off ball, which is of interest to me. But I do think it should probably be Lonzo at least to start the year, and then you can tinker with it as you go, see what other players can maybe slot in there. But I would say him. I would say Hunter. I would say obviously Donovan and Evan. Then obviously Jarrett. I think make up the starting five, at least out of the jump for the starting lineup. And then it all kind of depend on how things shift from there based on Darius's recovery. Which, like you said earlier, I think if you're the Cavs, you slow play as much as possible. There's no need to rush him back. And plus, like from a fan perspective, we know what the conversations are like around Darius every single year. That he can't finish seasons, he's hurt too much, he fades late in the year. So those things all sort of come into play where it's like, if that's how you feel, if that's what people think is going to happen, why not just let him get back out there when he's fully ready and know that you'll have like all the spring and then into the playoffs to kind of have him up to speed and get him back feeling his best. And I think that's probably the way they will handle it because like you said, you want him playing that time of year, playoff time of year at his best, and not necessarily like you don't need him doing that in December and January per se.
I think one of the more fascinating things that I want to talk about a little bit before I kind of formulate what I think the starting five should be is over the past couple of years, JB Bickerstaff did this and Kenny Atkinson did it as well, but they would have their pairing, right? You would have with JB, it was Donovan played most of his minutes alongside Jarrett Allen. And Darius would play alongside Evan Mobley. And Kenny switched those things where Donovan played most of his minutes with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen and Darius Garland played together much more frequently. I wonder if Kenny is going to stick with those two things. That is a very interesting thing to me because if he is open to, at least when Darius is out, having Donovan be the guy that is tied to Jarrett Allen a little bit more, I think that might make a little bit more sense to start Sam Merrill then. Because if you do that, you're going to bring Lonzo Ball in when Donovan Mitchell goes out because you're going to need that playmaking on the floor. And I do think, too, the other side of things that I'm very interested in with Lonzo is how much better he can make Evan Mobley because he is a playmaking guard that Evan really hasn't played with. Like Darius Garland is a fantastic playmaker, but they're different kinds of playmakers, if you will. Like they're not the same type of point guard. They're both point guards, but they're different point guards in the way they operate offensively. I think that he can really help grow Evan Mobley. So if that is the case, I almost wonder if the Cavs would like to bring Lonzo Ball in sort of around the same time Ty Jerome came into games last year.
Yeah.
And I also think it might be a little dangerous to start Lonzo Ball because the Cavs should not be expecting him to play 30 games or 30 minutes per game. Like he should be somebody that's between maybe 18 and 23 minutes a night. And if he's starting, and I know that he's not ever going to be the full-time starter, but that's not what we're talking about. But if he is a starter at certain points in the season, his minutes are naturally going to ramp up. And I just don't know that you're going to get the most out of him or some of the bench lineups that you could create around him and potentially Evan Mobley, if that's the case.
Yeah, I really like the idea. And this is why you're the host of Locked On Cavs and I'm not. I like the Sam Merrill idea there, like having him be that shooting guard next to Donovan, leaving him on the floor with Jarrett for a little bit, and then having Lonzo come out with Evan. And the other part of that too, with Evan is all off season, Donovan talked about it. Kenny talked about it. Evan Mobley is certainly aware of it. They keep saying like, he's the guy that has to take a leap, right? For them to take that next step and go further in the playoffs and be a true title contender. And I think if that's going to happen, I think I love the idea of almost switching up how Kenny Atkinson had the pairings for the sort of core four guys last year to this year, because I think especially early in the season when Darius isn't out there, if you have a lineup that's Lonzo sort of leaning on Evan once Donovan steps off to take a breather, I like that because I think that's the situation that makes Evan demand the ball more and makes Evan sort of have to, maybe with several second unit guys on the floor with him, sort of figure out like, okay, I need to take over in this moment, or here's where I can sort of step up. And then he starts to get that feel a little bit more. And that's what you obviously want from him. Like that's the next phase of his development. So I do like where your head's at with that. And, thinking about it more, I do think Sam makes a lot of sense because I was kind of envisioning Lonzo and Donovan as sort of like what you get with Darius and Donovan already. Like you're sort of replicating that. But with your setup, I like it because Donovan certainly can handle the ball. And then he has tons of options around him to sort of contribute and score and whatever. And then you get that sort of switch, like you said, where you maybe take Evan off and he stays out there with Sam and Jarrett. And it does pave the way for Lonzo to come in. And then Lonzo's already sort of in the role that you think he's probably going to play late in the season. So that's a well thought out sort of the process there. And I like sort of the outcomes that potentially presents.
Well, and I think the thing with yours in terms of starting Lonzo Ball, it takes some of the onus off of Donovan Mitchell. Because if you mentioned that Donovan has broken down at the end of seasons, he hasn't been healthy in the playoffs, he has been compromised at the end of each of the past two Cavs playoff runs, having additional playmaking on the floor with him at all times, because when the Cavs are fully healthy, you could build a world where Donovan Mitchell always has Darius Garland or Lonzo Ball out there, given that everybody's fully healthy, which is no given. The Cavs might never play a game fully healthy this year. Might not. It didn't happen last year until the middle of January. So if that's the case, you can build a structure where Donovan is always playing the 2-guard spot. He's never playing point guard. I don't know if that's maximizing him, but I do think that is doing the best to keep him fresh, which I think is probably a little bit more important in the regular season than maximizing Donovan Mitchell, because the Cavs are going to win a lot of games no matter what. But I think either answer is okay. But I also look at it and say, well, who's more likely to miss time? Are the Cavs going to play Lonzo Ball 82 games this year? I doubt it. I would imagine he's going to play somewhere, if he stays healthy, he's going to play somewhere between 65 and 70 games if he's healthy the entire season. I would think he's not going to play in every single back-to-back. He's probably going to get a night off here or there because, much like keeping Donovan Mitchell healthy, they want to keep everybody healthy when the postseason arrives, because winning regular season games is not the goal for this team. So I look at this and say, well, if Sam Merrill's more likely to be in the lineup consistently at the start of the year, maybe having him be the starter to try and have some form of consistency from night to night makes the most sense.
Yeah, I like that thought process a lot. And to your point on like just the health side of things, I think it would be crazy to assume Lonzo Ball is going to play every game. That's not the goal. Like that was the thing everybody pointed out when they signed him. Can he stay healthy? Whatever. The way you keep him healthy is sort of the trend of the NBA, right? Like the load management thing has to come into play. And even if that trickles down the roster, I mean, it's not really that far-fetched either, because there was times last year where Kenny Atkinson gave Ty Jerome nights off, right? If we're sort of assuming he's in a similar spot, in a similar role, in a similar sort of situation minutes-wise, and how much he's probably going to contribute to this team, the same thing sort of applies. The load management thing knows no bounds. They're certainly going to do it with Donovan. They'll do it with all the core 4 guys at some point, except maybe Jarrett if he wants to play 82 games again. But yeah, I think that's fair. And when you have a player who has that injury history, it probably makes sense to, try to limit the minutes he's playing, especially early in the season, so that when you get to the postseason, you have him as long as you need, and he can fill whatever role he needs to and maximize the minutes he's playing. So, I would expect that's going to kind of be the route they take, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody if you see some of these guys in and out of the lineup at times, and there's load management nights, or if guys just get injured for certain stretches and they got to sort of nurse them back before the playoffs get roll around.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting to find out as training camp is really, really close. We are less than 2 weeks from media day.
Yeah.
We are like 3.5 weeks, Spencer, from the first preseason basketball game that the Cavs will play this year. I personally can't wait.
I'm excited, not only for that, but also to see your face every day, Danny. I can't wait.
Well, we can't all be as lucky as you getting to see me all the time. But thank you, Spencer, so much for taking the time to jump on Locked on Cavs. If you want more Spencer German, he covers the Cavs. He has his own Cavs podcast, which you can find anywhere you get your podcast. Just search for Courtside with the Cavs, or Of course, for your second listen today, go check out Locked On Browns, or as I like to call it, Locked On Shore Sanders, where Spencer German is the esteemed host of that podcast. Go check that out. Make sure you're making that your second listen today. And thank you for making this one your first listen today. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. And if you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor as we get out of here. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.